Today, I'm going to help you podcast panic-free by helping you understand how Apple Podcasts works. Hey, I'm Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com, where I help you massage your message. I help you tackle the technology, face your fears, and flatten the learning curve, and not just get you podcasting, but get you podcasting. And today we're talking about podcasting headache-free, panic-free, in the right direction. And so what we're going to talk about today is understanding Apple Podcasts. And sometimes it's called Apple iTunes. They want you to call it Apple Podcasts. And we're going to start off with something we know, and that is, of course, radio. And this is a DJ, and they've got their booth, and they've got all their special toys in there, and the turntable, and the phone, and their microphone. And that gets blasted out via a tower that blasts a frequency. Now, that frequency is a bunch of gobbledygook if you looked at it on an oscilloscope, but you take that and you tune it into a radio and you hear the station. Well, how do you tune it in? Well, that actual gobbledygook is an actual frequency. And here in Ohio, one of the top stations is 100.7, home of the buzzard. And so when you tune a radio into that, you will hear it. Now, it doesn't matter if it's an old radio, if it's a car radio, or even if it's an old boom box. When you tune to 100.7, you get that station. Podcasting is not a whole lot different. Okay? So far, so good? Excellent. Let's move on. Let's go back to where we were. The DJ now is replaced by someone maybe in a spare bedroom. Now, if this was my client, they wouldn't be using a Blue Snowball, and they wouldn't be that's way too far away from the microphone. But nonetheless, this is going to be somebody in their spare bedroom recording a podcast. And instead of needing a tower to make it go out to the world, you can have a media host. Now, I like Libsyn, and of course you're going to say, Dave, but that's because you work for them, to which I say, I was a customer for 10 years before I was an employee. And if you don't like Libsyn, try Blueberry or Podbean or Spreaker. There are a ton, but this is something that syndicates. Libsyn actually stands for Liberated Syndication. Use the coupon code SOPFREE to get a free month at Libsyn.com. But they syndicate your frequency. Well, on the radio, we said it was 100.7. What's the frequency in podcasting? What's this thing called an RSS feed? And it's probably one of the most confusing things. And I'm here to tell you, don't worry about it. You get one, and all you have to know what it is. And mine is schoolofpodcasting.libsyn.com/RSS. Now, that's a mouthful. And you could see if I had to have somebody type that in, they might not get it. Just like if somebody was tuning into a station and they're tuning and trying to find 100.7. Well, you'll see on that radio, they actually have presets that take you right to that frequency. Great. Well, that's actually in the app world, right? We have radios in the radio world that tune into that frequency. In the podcast world, how do you tune into your RSS feed? Through apps. Apps replace radios. And so when I have a link on my website to Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts, it takes people right to my podcast. So it's like a preset that you can put on your website so people don't have to find your show in Apple Podcasts. In fact, that's one of the things you never want to tell your audience, find me in Apple Podcasts, because as I record this right now, there are over 600,000 podcasts in Apple Podcasts and probably 1,000 more a week. You want to have these buttons on your website. They're presets for your podcast to go right to people's radios, right? Their apps, so they can tune in. Now, a couple other things. It's the same information in the same way that if you tune into an old car radio or a car stereo or a boombox, it's the same thing. Here on the left is my show in Apple Podcast. On the right, it's in Google Podcast. Same information, different radio, or in this case, a different app. So you can see how you are syndicated. I'm going to use the word Libsyn here going forward, and I'm going to use Apple Podcasts for the app just to keep things easy. And I want you to realize Apple Podcasts is a mirror. There's nothing in Apple Podcasts. It simply reflects whatever is in your media host. So in my case, it would be Libsyn. Whatever I put in Libsyn shows up in Apple Podcasts. Now, what's confusing about Apple Podcasts is this thing. And this is kind of a web-based version of Apple Podcasts along with Apple iTunes. And typically, these are updated once every 24 hours. So it's always a little behind sometimes. And so I say this because what you want people to do is subscribe to your show. When people subscribe to your show, they are tuned in directly to your frequency. If we go back to radio, right into your feed. So the minute you put out an episode, your subscribers get it almost instantly. So what happens is people will go to this view, kind of the web-based view, and go, oh my gosh, I just released an episode. I don't see it. You want to subscribe to your show so you will see it the minute it comes out. But keep in mind, again, that Apple Podcasts is a mirror. So let's put this into practice. Let's say I look at my listing and I go, holy cow, that's a really long description. Nobody's going to read that. Now, do I go to Apple Podcasts to change that? No, I'm going to go to Libsyn because Apple Podcasts, again, is a mirror. And I would change it in Libsyn, and probably in about 24 hours, that would update. And if I go back to my listing and I go, oh, you know what? The podcast website, that link down there, that goes to the wrong website. Would I go to Apple Podcasts to change that? No, because Apple Podcasts is a mirror. You get the point here. So whatever your media host is, change it there. It'll take about 24 hours for it to update in Apple Podcasts. And the one thing you can really do, even if you don't use Apple Podcasts, one thing you can do as a troubleshooting tool to avoid the panic, to avoid the, hey, where the heck is my show, is to subscribe to your own show. That way, when you look in that app and you see your latest episode, but you go to the web-based version, or if you go to Apple iTunes, the desktop version, and they're still that 24 hours behind, you see right here as a subscriber, nope, my technology is working, and I know it's just a matter of time until these other apps, they catch up. So if you'd like to continue to podcast headache-free, panic-free, come on over and visit me at schoolofpodcasting.com. I would love to help you plan, launch, and grow your podcast through my courses, my coaching, and my community. We'll see you over there. Take care and happy podcasting.